Fire Away tackles burning questions and hot topics in Canadian employment law, human resources, and dispute resolution. Hosted by Rudner Law, Fire Away is your go-to source for legal insight on the world of work. So whether you are an employee or an employer, a lawyer or an HR pro, let's ignite the conversation and get into today's episode. Here's your host, employment lawyer, mediator, and founder of Rudner Law, Stuart Rudner.
Welcome to episode 102 of Fire Away. Today I'm joined by two fantastic guests, and we're tackling a question that sounds simple, but challenges organizations of all sizes. How do you work efficiently and cost effectively with your employment lawyer? Not just when to call them, but how do you use a relationship strategically so that it ends up working with you rather than against you and your budget? So I spent 27 years on the legal side of this question, and I can tell you the mistakes I see are pretty consistent, and they're usually at one extreme or the other. I see a lot of organizations that are so worried about their legal spend that HR isn't even allowed to call their lawyer unless the building is on fire. And the result is that they make a lot of decisions without legal input, and what seems like a cost savings mechanism ends up costing a lot more money down the road. And on the flip side, I see organizations who are calling their employment lawyer all the time with questions that a seasoned HR professional could easily handle at a fraction of the cost. Neither of these approaches is advisable. So today we're going to approach the conversation from three different perspectives. You're going to get mine as usual, but then I'm also joined by two great guests. As I said, first, Peter Treacy, founder and principal of Tantalo Strategic Human Resources, a boutique HR firm in Ontario. Peter brings 25 years of HR experience across talent acquisition, occupational health and safety, learning and development, and HR leadership. And I will say Peter is a great source of jazz information and musicians if you're listening to music to listen to while you're working or in your off time. So I'm looking forward to Peter. You're going to give us the HR lens, how lawyers and HR professionals can work together to actually serve the organizations that we are there to support. So Peter, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me, Stuart, and very nice to meet you, Prasad. Looking forward to our conversation, everybody.
And Prasad Rao is our second guest today, COO of Infield Solutions, where he's been driving operations for nearly a decade. I love the way Prasad describes himself as chief bottle washer, which basically makes the point, and we make this point in our firm all the time because we're a small group. Real leadership essentially means doing whatever it takes to keep the team moving and keep the lights on, and that's what Prasad does, but I think does a lot more than that as well. And I know Prasad through Tech Connects, which is a great community of entrepreneurs where Prasad has had leadership positions there. I've enjoyed a lot of the groups that I've been part of. Prasad has been there as well, and he always brings a very pragmatic approach to the discussion. So I think he's going to help us today, bring us the sort of small to medium-sized business perspective on how you work with your employment lawyer. So Prasad, thank you as well for joining us.
I'm glad to be here, Stuart. Thank you. Peter, welcome, and looking forward to our chat.
I'm looking forward to it as well. So I'll ask each of you just to expand on my introduction. Tell listeners a little bit more about your background and the perspective you're bringing to this discussion. Prasad, why don't you go first?
Okay. Well, I'm a slightly older person. I've been in the workforce.
We all say that these days.
Yeah, I know, right? I've been in the workforce for almost 40 years, and first 20 was working in corporate with multiple different companies, Bell being the largest, Bell Canada, and subsidiaries for Bell. And then I left the country for 3 years. I moved to the Middle East. I had a brilliant time in the Middle East. Came back from the Middle East after my contract was finished, and I felt like I wanted to do something different. And you start out in your mid-40s. You tell everybody, oh no, you start young, learn, make mistakes, everything, and you start in your mid-40s, and you think, you jump into it both feet, and you make a lot of mistakes, whether you're a 25-year-old or a 45-year-old. And this is my fourth-ish startup, which has lasted the longest. And a small business owner, all products made in Canada and deployed in Canada and the US. And we're trying everything we can, like you said, chief bottle washer, to keep the lights on and do what we need to do to keep our team together and keep our customers happy with our service.
Awesome, that's great. I did not know that full background, so that was really interesting to hear about you. But yeah, you are, a lot of the clients that our firm works with are just, basically just like you. They're small owner operator. They are often growing. They're often getting very busy, but they usually don't take the time at the beginning to think about HR and things like that. So it's something that you have to deal with as you're growing, and there's always this pain point of figuring out, when do you spend money on a lawyer, when don't you, and are you taking on more risk by not doing it. So again, I think you bring a perfect perspective to this. And Peter, you've got a bit of a different perspective, but a really good one, because a lot of the clients we work with, some of them have in-house HR or they have external HR, and then they often are not quite sure when to call HR, when to call a lawyer, when to let their HR call the lawyer. So maybe you can, like I said, expand a bit more on your background and your perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And really, it does come down, Stuart and Prasad, to service and support. I got into HR just with the idea of helping people. What happens is you build some fundamentals, you build some experience. There are things that are always changing that sort of come into that toolbox, come into that mix, and you're utilizing those things to really go for full circle on your purpose, which is to say, here, I made this for you, I heard you, and it's not as bad as you might think it is. So let's try to work it out. And really, I got to that perspective just over the course of my career. For 25 years, I've been in occupational health and safety, learning and development, and more recently in HR operational and strategic roles over the last 10 years. I actually started as a third-party recruiter without even knowing that HR was a thing back in 2000. And it was like
Wow.
it opened up this wonderful, wonderful world of people dynamics in workplaces. And really, that's been my journey. And I just sort of continue on that path. With Tantalo Strategic Human Resources, I've essentially taken a while to choose myself. And what Prasad mentioned earlier about time and starting in his mid 40s really resonated with me because I've sort of had my foot on the gas and taken it off and gone into industry and come back out and learned a lot along the way. It's been a fantastic journey, but choosing myself fully took some time. And to Prasad's point, time is a resource. So what I've learned is, yes, it's finite, but you use what you have because you still have enough time to really make an impact and get clear on who you are and what you're doing and how you're sharing for those around you, and especially clients in the context of this conversation. And really, this is just a great opportunity to share some ideas. I'm here to learn and share, and that's the spirit I'm bringing to today's meeting. So thanks for having me.
Thank you again for joining, and I'll take you up on that offer of sharing some ideas. I'll let you answer the next question first. I want to start at a fairly high level. Basically, what I wanted to ask was, what is your view about how particularly small to mid-sized businesses should work with their employment lawyers? So I'll let you share that, and Prasad jump in, and then we can get into some more detailed discussion. But we can start at a fairly high level.
Yeah, so with small and medium-sized business owners, especially in my experience, they've had to do a lot of things in their scope of business on their own. And that could be anything from, purchasing trucks, figuring things out for a website, managing clients and customers, as well as whatever their skill or their domain might be. Let's just say your local plumber, for instance, right? And so ultimately, what I've seen over and over again in these situations, dental practices, different types of small, medium sized business owners, they have a wealth of experience in trying a few different things. The ones that are going to sort of take your advice, whether you're on the HR side of the street or you're offering legal services and legal advice, is to stay open. You know, I'm a small and medium-sized business owner. I've done a lot of things to get to the point that I'm at right now, but I don't know what I don't know. So I'm going to listen to this employment lawyer, and they're going to be able to advise me on the challenge I'm having. So you know the nuances as an SMB, but you need to also stay open to allow for the things you don't know to fill in those pockets to create a solution for the situation you find yourself in. So I would say open-mindedness combined with your own lived experience is going to well position a small and medium-sized business owner to really get the most out of the conversation and the relationship.
Yeah, I like the way you put that, Peter. You don't know what you don't know. And yeah, it's so true because so many of the business owners we work with, I mean, they are great at what they do. And we work with a lot of dentists. You mentioned dentists, doctors, they're obviously very intelligent. They're very good at what they do. Same thing with the trades. They know how to run a business, but they don't know what they don't know. And I think the danger, and we can get into this later, is sometimes people make assumptions about how employment laws work, as well as other things, and that's what often gets them into trouble. So your point about being open and listening and recognizing that you're not the expert in everything is really key. So Prasad, what about you from your perspective? How do you see the small and medium-sized businesses effectively working with external employment lawyers?
I see it in several ways, and I look at it in steps. Um, Off the top, day-to-day activity, I'll likely do things on my own. I'll research it, Claude, ChatGPT, all these things give me, a perspective on the approach that I want to take with my team. The approach is even like I work with a lot of trades organizations, big developers and everything else. And when we build our software, we have to recognize where that software fits into those organizations. So it's almost like we're integrating HR and the requirements of the number of hours worked, how overtime is calculated, the monitoring of people in the field. All of those things are if you look at it, an HR oriented series of requirements by our customer. But you get to a stage where like Peter said, you don't know what you don't know, and you can research all sorts of things, and it'll come to a point where it's like, okay, I've taken it as far as I can. I need the next level of conversation. And that's when we would, speak to a person like yourself, Stuart, or your team to say, okay, we think we know, and no matter how much you read, you don't know all the nuances around it. And so then that's where, organizations like ours would bring in a person like yourself to say, okay, here's what's going on. Here's the specifics around it. How do we approach our team? How do we approach our customer? How do we convey that message to the customer on, the approach that we're taking, and what does that mean for us as an organization? And that's where I would see, engaging an employment lawyer or a legal team like yourself.
Yeah, in fact, it's really helpful, and it's great to see it or hear it from your perspective. Because one of the things that we often try to do, and I'll talk a bit more about billing arrangements at some point because I think that's a really important part. Like we ideally, like I want to be part of the team. I want to be part of your strategic advisors and be in regular contact and know what's going on. And of course, that often generates a fear in the owner's eyes when they hear regular contact. They hear large bills. So we got to figure out how to balance that. But I guess the key is figuring out when to call. And I was going to flip this around. I don't know if either of you have, I mean, I'll call them horror stories, but I guess just examples of situations where businesses didn't use their lawyers the way they should have or in the best way and what happened. So I'll leave it to both of you guys, whoever wants to jump in.
I'll if it's okay, Peter, I'll jump in first.
Sure
So
thing.
we had a situation, uh, not myself, but a very close friend of mine who uh, uh, he runs a technology company. He converts organizations, large organizations, from one technology platform to another technology platform. Really complex stuff, really difficult to process, mainly because of inertia. When somebody's using a tool, and even if it's not the greatest tool, they don't want to move because the cost of moving from one tool to another is horrendous. And his job is to try and, shrink that down, reduce the amount of time it takes, make it easy on the end customer and so on. One of his sales team members, whom he, pays on salary, has his own, side consulting. Everybody does side consulting these days. And, his job was to go after some of these larger contracts, do the work, bring it into to the organization. And after about 3 months, he learned that, the expected results weren't appearing. And what he further learned in additional communication directly now with the customer is that the individual that was working for him was creating a sideline business to do work for himself and not bringing it through the organization.
Great.
And he actually came to me and he goes, Prasad, what should I do? And I said, well, first things first, connect to your customer. Don't worry about what he's done and make sure your customer is satisfied with your business. And if they're not, then see what you can do to make sure that that customer is satisfied and you have the ear of the customer. That's the first part. The second part is, okay, everybody has a side gig, but if what you've done so far is offer all the materials, bring all that back, but none of it has come through in the last 3 or 6 months. I think it was 6 months. You have to let them go, or you have to figure out a way to either put them on a PIP somehow, define what the metrics are for that individual, and then monitor it. You just can't let them go. You got to monitor that individual. And if that doesn't work, or if they're challenging on it, well, then you have to come up with a way to say, you know what, thanks very much. Appreciate the time you've given us. Unfortunately, the results haven't proven themselves, and then we have to move on to somebody else to take over. I don't know how much of a horror story, but I think that's a relatively standard story that a lot of people will go through. It all depends on how you approach it, and the feedback and potential animosity that would exist between a sales individual and the owner of the business.
Right. Yeah, it's a great story. You're right. It's a pretty common one. And to me, it's a great example of where you should be working with either an employment lawyer or an HR consultant, or perhaps both. Because I see the horror stories, and it's funny because your story is very similar to one that I've been watching over the last 3 months with a client of mine, where they had an employee, and in this case, she was just not doing what she was supposed to, and would not accept any feedback, and was not improving. And so this was one of the clients on the end of the spectrum where they only call the lawyers when they absolutely have to. So they decided exactly what you said: put the employee on a PIP, and hopefully she'll get better. But if not, at least we'll document it, so perhaps we'll have just cause for dismissal if it doesn't work out. But they didn't call us, which is always frustrating for me, because what ended up happening was she didn't get any better. In fact, she fought every single point in the PIP tooth and nail and refused to acknowledge anything. But because they didn't document it well, it really didn't get them anywhere, because after the 3 or 4 months that they gave her, they still didn't have enough to pursue just cause for dismissal, because there was not sufficient warnings, not sufficient communication. They didn't monitor it properly. All the types of steps that I would advise them on, Peter, you probably would have advised them on, but they didn't. So that's actually a great example of where you need to get external, or unless if you happen to have internal HR, you need to use those resources. And then we can talk about terminations as well, because that's probably the biggest source of risk, but it's also the biggest source of misconceptions or misunderstandings and assumptions. And I see so many business owners who either assume how severance works, or they'll do a quick Google search and then decide that's how the law is. And that's probably the most common scenario, where we see clients who try to save money by not consulting us originally, and then they come to us later when they get the demand letter or the statement of claim. It costs them a lot more. I don't want to digress too far, Peter. I think you've been waiting to jump in.
Yeah, no, it's good. I think this is a phenomenal discussion. I did want to double click on a few things mentioned by yourself, Stuart, and also you, Prasad, as well. On that most recent point, Stuart, like the devil is in the details, right? So you can do a Google search, you can do all the reading you want, as Prasad had alluded to earlier. But really, this idea of nuance in a current situation with a small, medium-sized business owner and the advice they're going to get from someone who's seen it before is very important, right? So that's key. And really that client that calls in, um, eh, everything's reactive, but it's a question of how intense that reactivity is. And the longer you're waiting, the tougher it is for either a lawyer or an HR professional to give the appropriate advice. Your optionality seems to go away the longer the reactivity is, and the longer a situation is allowed to fester. And it's so funny, Prasad, with the story you had mentioned. Really trust is like the biggest currency that we have, and I think especially in this crazy world. And I'm not anti-tech; I'm actually pro-tech, and I think we live in a very um, optimistic time in human history. And I'm going way off script here, so I might have to get it edited out. But
I know you're going to bring this back to your point. I have every
thank you.
confidence in you.
Thank you. And here comes the boomerang. Like at the same time, there's guardrails, there's checks and balances, there's bad actors, there's people that'll work for ABC entity, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, and then try to steal all their clients with their own consulting gig. And that's my point about trust, right? Like I want to point to that just because I'm in the middle of the earliest stages of what's going to be a very bountiful partnership with a very trusted HR leader in another part of the province. And we trust each other immensely. We really get each other. We get along. We like each other. We're aligned in a lot of what we provide for our clients and customers. And in the evolution of this, for me, it's really twofold. One, don't overstep in this relationship, and two, um, bring my best self, right? So, and that means there's no side deals. If we're folding things together and I have sort of existing partnerships or other things I was working on, I bring them to this gentleman and I say, this is what I'm working on. How does this fit with what we're doing? So that this trust, transparency, being your true self, knowing that there might be messes, but trying to clean it up along the way, very important. But yeah, I really wanted to double click on those things. And Stuart, one other thing about the employee who was pushing back on the PIP, my feeling is that individual probably engaged a lawyer on for her purposes much earlier than her employer did.
Yeah, which is kind of ironic because most people assume that, well, it's the big bad company and their team of lawyers against the little guy. But you're right. In many cases it's exactly the opposite. The company is trying to do it without legal advice, and the individual is being coached properly. And then, as you said, Peter, you kind of the longer you wait, the more it becomes about minimizing the damage as opposed to preventing it in the first place. So that's a great example. Uh, a couple of things I wanted to jump to, but one of them is actually a bit of an opportunity, Peter, I guess, for you to kind of promote what you do, because there's a lot of businesses who are really not big enough to justify having an HR department, and even having one HR person full time. And what I've seen is sometimes, once they develop a good relationship with a lawyer, and I've seen it with our firm, where we've got a great relationship with our clients, which I love that. And I love the fact that they trust us and they rely on us. But sometimes I find that they're calling us with questions that are really more for someone like yourself, for an HR professional, and it's just not cost effective to be calling us for those things. So how, are you seeing a lot of companies that are now looking at some sort of fractional HR option, and what's your suggestion on how they should approach that?
Yeah, so excellent question. The first answer is yes. I'm seeing a lot more fractional HR and companies identifying that need. Um, but what I'd like to see more of is when companies identify that need, they get clear on scope and domain,
Hmm.
right? Because I think that's sort of where a lot of the clarity is going to come from in terms of this is for HR and this is for an legal professional. And it's not that the twain doesn't meet. In fact, there will be a lot of overlap, but let's start with a defined scope in each area so that, again, we're just in a position of strength to deal with what comes up in a reactive way. So really, what the approach I take in helping my clients is quite simple. I have a framework which allows for what's called a compliance floor. And this would have been a colleague of ours that mentioned it. And I do know Mark is going to work behind the scenes and take care of a few things, but would it be okay to mention this person's name?
I'm not sure who you're referring to, but I don't think it'd be an issue. Go ahead, go right ahead.
Well, Daryl Singer, we both know Daryl Singer
Oh,
from way back, and he explained the compliance floor very clearly to me. And I used that framework at the time to teach occupational health and safety in a prior life. But my point to all this is right now, what I do is I start with a compliance floor with the idea of where are our best practices from an HR standpoint. And that can be in talent acquisition, that can be in fulsome policy that's actually followed and understood, right across the whole gamut of a few different areas of HR. So best practices laying on top of a compliance floor. And then I do an HR audit or a cultural assessment. And wherever there's gaps, I work on trying to fill those gaps. Wherever things are doing well, wherever companies are doing well, you're gonna see where those areas are, and you're gonna want to augment them or certainly not, dismiss them while you're making improvements in other areas. And that's what I try to do. You're trying to come up with solutions and service to real problems. You're going to be okay with going into the hard areas because you got a good framework to start with. And it's all underpinned by optimism that here's where we are, here's where we want to be, and we can get there, systematically and through some genuine respect, an understanding that resilience is necessary, and putting one foot in front of the other to take the appropriate actions.
yeah, I like the way you put that, and having clear domains and clear scopes, like you said, because like that's my ideal arrangement is where we're working with a client, they're also working with HR, maybe internal, maybe external, and then the client gets the best of both worlds, right? They get,
Right.
first of all, two different perspectives, two different sets of expertise, and the right work is being done by the right person at the right price, which is exactly what you want. So Prasad, I'm curious to know, from your perspective, whether it's your company or just people that you're talking to, what do you see people doing in terms of their use of HR and external legal?
So I have about 300 different examples, but I'm going to try to focus on
Okay, we've got about 2 minutes, so go ahead.
2 minutes. Okay.
I'm kidding.
A lot of it, working with small to medium-sized companies is the objective for all the companies, mine, other small businesses, is I got to keep the company alive. I got to make sure that my people are getting paid on time. I got to keep my cash flow going, and I got to make sure that the customer is satisfied with the solutions that I'm providing on a daily basis. I think the tricky part in with a lot of businesses that I'm working with is, there's a line of customer facing, and then there's a line of the administrators in the back end that are supporting the customer facing people. And the customer facing side can be, depending on the customers, can be challenging. But it's a unique skill set to be customer facing in that way. But I think it really does come down to, and I like the concept of fractional HR that you talked about, Stuart. Everything comes down to, as a small business, some level of cash flow. And so, yes, there's the trusted partnership. Yes, there's a skill set that that I'm looking for, that I need because I don't have it. Like, I can learn all sorts of things like that. But is that really the job that I want? Um, you know, I say this to my customers all the time. Oh yeah, this is stuff I can do. I can generate this code, through Claude or whatever. And I said, you're right. You're absolutely right. You can do that. But is your job to sit there and be the IT person? Is your job to be the code generator and then know that this is the way you want to go? Or is your job to, drive the business forward? If, I look at myself, I look at all the companies that I work for, is my job to be the HR person? Can I be? Yes. But is that my focus? No, because I've got 15 other focuses. And this is a very small aspect of all the things that I focus on. And I love the concept of fractional HR, or even in the case of with Stuart, fractional legal in a way.
Yeah.
I like the idea of, and I'm going to throw this out as Tech Connects, where you have the opportunity to talk about the issues that you're having amongst a group of business owners, experts like Stuart or Peter, and learn even in a small aspect things that you can do differently to move your business forward. And that, I think, is the next step of what's necessary as small businesses, is to be able to find somebody trusted, speak to them about, okay, these are the things that I'm having as issues. How does that work? I'm learning a lot about coaching these days. My wife has become a coach. There's a ton of stuff to be able to do around coaching, but there's the one-on-one coaching, and then there's the one-to-group coaching.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And the one-to-group coaching is just as valuable as the one-on-one, because you're
Yeah.
now getting perspectives from multiple different people who are in a similar situation like you are. And to me, that's a great learning,
Okay.
as a small business, but also for all my customers.
Yeah, no, I'm in a group coaching session. You're right. There's usually 5 or 6 or 8 other lawyers in my group. The lawyers anywhere in North America, different practice areas. We all have similar issues, and yeah, you learn from everyone, not just from the coach. But yeah, I wanted to come back to a couple of things you said. One is, yeah, it's critical as a business owner, and I try to force this myself to do this. You shouldn't be trying to be everything. I could be playing with Claude and figuring out how to get it to do all sorts of stuff, and I love doing that kind of thing. But it's not necessarily the best use of my time. So figuring out when to delegate. I also get it as a small business owner. I still often think of this story because it shows how, as a parent, you can say do as I say, not as I do. It's kind of the same thing as an employment lawyer sometimes, because I remember, for years I would, get frustrated by my clients who, would have to do an employment agreement, and then they wouldn't get a lawyer to do it. They do it themselves or find it online. And then I remember the first time when after I left a big firm and I had to sign a lease for our office space, and I got the lease and by email, and my first thought was, well, do I need to call a real estate lawyer, or should I just I'm a lawyer, I can probably do this myself. And then I caught myself doing exactly what I say my client should never do. So I understand the temptation. I understand how hard it is to get around that. But I also, from the other perspective, see what happens when people try to do it themselves. But I also, of course, the time always flies by, and it has flown by here. We've already covered a lot of really good topics and good points. One thing I want to talk about before we wrap things up is the billing arrangement, because you mentioned, Prasad, fractional legal. One of the things, I've mentioned this on previous episodes, we are really trying to move partially to fixed fee services, but also subscriptions. And we've started to build this out. We've tried with a few clients. We're implementing it more broadly now, where you're not paying for every email or every phone call. You're not paying by the minute. You're paying a monthly fee, and it gets you a relationship. And the focus, and these are not my ideas, I'm stealing these from other people, but gets the idea is that you're not paying for a contract. You're not paying for a 6 minutes. You're paying for a relationship. And that's ideally what I want to have, is have that ongoing relationship with our clients. And I think that's where you get the most benefit. But when you're paying for every minute, that just creates a barrier to the relationships. So I'd love to get both your thoughts on so the best ways to arrange the relationships, whether it's with an HR consultant or a lawyer, from a financial perspective, what you've seen or heard, and what you think works.
I can jump in. I love the concept of MRR, monthly recurring revenue. Like that's the holy grail when you run a technology company or a software company, and your multiples from a valuation perspective, go up when you've got MRR versus what's called one-time revenues or ARR, right? Um, oh yeah, sorry. Anyway, couple of quick things that pop into my head as you were saying it, Stuart. One is and we do this with our customers, is we want to make sure that as a support team to our customers, we want to engage with them regularly. Hey, we haven't heard from you in a while. Just wanted to touch base, see how things are going. Let us know if you have any issues. See, there's the support role, and I was in IT for a very long time. As long as nobody called me, everything was working fine. So,
Right.
but the problem with that kind of a concept is that relationship that you have with, whoever that customer is, you want that relationship to move forward. So, if you said, okay, you've got an hour a month or 2 hours a month, whatever that figure is, and you break that across, you know, 20 customers, 50 customers, 100 customers. Now you can, offer it at a price point that makes sense, but not every customer is going to engage in exactly the same way at exactly the same time.
So true.
Really like the idea behind it. I think it's brilliant, and I think it's a direction that, a lot of organizations should take. I know I'm taking it, but I have a platform that I support my customers with, and whenever they have any issues, they call me up right away. Say, hey, this is not working correctly, and and I give them the time, and that also gives me the opportunity to talk about what they're doing, how they're doing it, what part of it is their business, why is it valuable to them, and how can I improve it through my platform. And I think that's the same idea, even with a fractional HR or fractional legal, is you want to be that, hey, Stuart, I need 10 minutes of your time, and I've got the ability to be able to pick up the phone and call you because of you built that relationship through the monthly recurring service that you're offering. I think it's a very cool idea. It just comes down to how many of your businesses are comfortable enough to bring you into that initial conversation.
Yeah. No, as Peter said before, the devil's in the details. So Prasad, I may pick your brain on this a little bit more as we move forward with
Absolutely.
it.
More than welcome to.
Well, appreciate that.
Yeah, I did want to
Peter.
share something just because there's just so much that's been triggered in this particular point. Um, your last point, Prasad, you asked it sort of as a rhetorical question, and I think that's sort of key because where I've landed is okay, I was quoting hourly rates, and I still do for a long time. Um, and I've been becoming more familiar with retainer type agreements and offering those. And what's happening is I'm taking a look at what the options are for billing and how they might align with value as defined not only financially, but in terms of this relationship building piece that Stuart, I think you mentioned pretty much off the hop with the monthly fees. And so in there, you have more than one pricing model. And if you're taking sort of a one size doesn't fit all approach, you can take your multiple pricing models and you don't have to stick a flag in the ground and say, this is what we do. You can simply say, this is what we offer. What solution might work best for your needs? And then you can actually weigh in to the customer and advise them on that point. I'm going to take sort of a case study approach to that. And don't worry, I'll wrap this up within, well, at least an hour and a half. I promise, guys. No, I'm just kidding. But most recently, I was doing some work for a contractor. Um, and that person needed their occupational health and safety policies, HR policies, onboarding checklist, contract of employment, a few different things just sort of built out. It's one individual with 2 or 3 employees in a growth stage. So far, so good. And what I did is I gave them an hourly rate, and I didn't tell them this, but I discounted the amount of hours. So it took a little bit longer than it would have, but I gave a discount on what I actually invoiced, but I maintained that hourly rate. What I did also was I used the opportunity to do the work for that individual to build trust. So they knew they got good value for what they paid. They received the foundational documents they absolutely needed, so they were able to exhale on that. But now, and we're actually having these conversations, is do we continue with you call me when you need me and I bill you by the hour? Or are we looking at something more permanent and recurring like a monthly fee? So both are on the table. What's going to happen is whatever that individual is comfortable with is where we're going to land. But in the bigger picture, we're not having a yes no conversation. We're having a yes yes based on what they're actually going to choose. So I don't think there's anything wrong with how we bill, even historically. It's just the challenge is one size did not fit all. Let's get real about that, and let's put some other different things on the table so a customer can make an informed choice that gives them the right peace of mind and really does a lot towards building that ongoing relationship.
We still got about an hour and 26 minutes left, Peter.
Yeah, I know. I'm out of breath, actually.
This is actually great if I'm paying you by the hour. Then that was a lot cheaper than I thought it was going to be. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
We are probably out of time for now because I think we've covered a lot, and we could probably do this again, and maybe we will do it again. But for now, I just want to thank both of you because that was exactly what I thought it was going to be.
Wow.
Lots of really insightful comments from both of you guys. So I appreciate both of you joining me, and happy to give both of you a chance to share if people want to find you. Maybe each take a turn and let people know the best way to reach you if they're interested in discussing anything more about this topic or working with you or anything else. Prasad, why don't you go first?
Sure. So my company is called Infield Solutions. We are on LinkedIn. We have our website. It's called infieldiq.com. And the objective of my company is twofold. One is how do we help businesses manage their people in the field? So we do a platform called Field Service Management Software. And the second part of our business is sensor management. So, for example, if you've got a air quality sensor or a leak sensor or a temperature humidity sensor, and with thresholds amongst those things, you want to be able to trigger alerts, but also trigger work orders for the right individual to be able to fix that particular problem. So we bridge the two platforms together to say, okay, I've got an alert. I need to send, Prasad the plumber, although I'm not a plumber, somebody who's the right individual to be able to fix that problem. And so that's where we bridge our two platforms together. And depending on the customer, we offer those things. But yeah, I'm happy to talk about MRR. I'm happy to talk about what my company does, and we're excited to be an all Canadian manufacturing platform.
Awesome. And you can also talk about Tech Connects as well and get people
And Tech Connects as well, 100%.
Which I have found to be tremendously useful. I know you have, so you can also promote that.
Yeah.
Peter, what about you?
Yeah. Peter Treacy. My company is Tantalo Strategic Human Resources. Best to reach me by ptracy01@gmail.com. And Prasad, offline, I'd love to get in touch with you and learn more.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it. Thanks
right,
so
well,
much for doing this, Stuart. This has been brilliant. I loved our conversation.
Thank you both for agreeing to do it. It was great. So yeah, I think that's a wrap on episode 102 of Fire Away. So again, huge thank you to Peter and Prasad for joining me today. We had a great discussion, which is pretty much everything I expected it would be. Thank you, as always, to Mark and our production team for bringing it all together. Most importantly, thank you for watching or listening. If you got something out of today's episode, the best thing you can do is subscribe on whatever platform you're listening on or watching on. Leave us a review or a rating, which genuinely helps people find the show. If you're on YouTube, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you'll never miss an episode. Also, in between episodes, if you want to keep up to date on employment law, then please follow the Rudner Law social media. We do a lot of posting on everything employment law related. And last but not least, I will wrap things up by quoting one of my favorite hockey broadcasters. The pleasure was all ours.
At Rudner Law, we want people to treat their employment relationships as legal relationships and make informed decisions rather than assumptions. Keep up to date on Canadian employment law issues by following us on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and TikTok, liking our Facebook page, subscribing to our YouTube channel, and signing up for our newsletter. Past episodes can be found on YouTube, on our website, and archived on Facebook. And if you like our page or subscribe to our channel, you will receive notifications when the episodes are live. As we always say, none of that replaces legal advice tailored to your specific circumstances. If you think you might need an employment lawyer, you probably do. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us.